Non-attachment is in no way being detached. It's not cold. It's not removed. It's not separate. It's being completely here. But it's being completely here without rushing into the moment and seeking to control it. It's been completely present and here because we've gone in to ourselves. We realize a couple of key messages. Firstly, we can only lead others as far as we've gone ourselves.
Welcome to The Art of Quality in Attention, a podcast that explores the ways in which master practitioners attend to their craft. The quality of attention plays a huge role in how we perceive and experience the world. By exploring how master practitioners pay attention in the context of their work, we hope to shed light on the inner game of seeking quality in work and life. I'm your host, William Oliver. On this episode of The Art of Quality in Attention, I had the privilege of sitting down with Patrick Boland. Patrick is a psychotherapist, leadership consultant, executive coach, and the author of the book, The Contemplative Leader. Patrick founded his consulting firm Conexus in 2013, and since then has worked with senior teams and leaders in global organizations ranging from Google, Unilever, Accenture, and Salesforce, to name just a few. Patrick was an introduction from fellow Art of Quality host Paul Higgins. I have had the pleasure of getting to know Patrick over the last couple of years and have been struck with the quality of his presence and the depth of his capacity to listen. My own experience of Patrick's book, The Contemplative Leader, has been as an excellent guide to shaping relationships and systems to use one's power and influence for the benefit of those around us. As Patrick himself would put it, the quality of presence we embody in our interactions fundamentally affects everything we do. The conversation we bring you today is a practical investigation of qualities inherent in effective leadership, according to a seasoned leadership coach. I hope you enjoy. Patrick, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to The Art of Quality in Attention.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here with you today, Will.
Well, to begin with, no small question, this word contemplation, it comes up a lot in your work. It's a word I think of when I think of you. It's a word that is alive when I'm in your presence. What does contemplation mean to you?
I love the question, and I love the last part in particular, because it's come to mean many different things to many different people. For me, when I think of the term contemplation, the shorthand as a synonym is non-attachment. So being present to what is here and now in this moment, without trying to force the moment, without trying to control it. Being aware of what it is that I want and what I need, what my preferences are in this moment, but also being open to other things unfolding, potentially even better things unfolding. In history and literature, some people have said that contemplation means in consideration of all things. So that way of thinking about it produces kind of a cognitive understanding of, am I aware of all the different ways of thinking about what's happening, all the different ways of perceiving where we are right now? And there's a lot of wisdom to that, and it's a lot of help to that. But for me, contemplation isn't just a cognitive experience. It's an embodied experience. It's something that taps into our deeper wisdom. It's where we're able to understand where we've come from, the context, what has brought us here, as individuals and as colleagues, as team members, and also to have a sense of the future, a sense of the long term, the vision, the strategy, and knowing that we might have a good plan for now, but perhaps things need to change as the environment changes, so we can remain open. There can be a flexibility, there can be a spaciousness about us as we approach each moment together and individually moving forward. The last thing I'll say about contemplation and what it means to me is it's the experience of being non-dualistic, the experience of having a both-and approach to life, to leadership. So I know what I want, but I'm open as well to seeing what others want, and we'll see what happens. I'm aware of what's going on within myself. I'm aware of my reactions to the latest thing that has happened, stress, challenge, deadline. But let's see. Let's see what else is going to take place. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's have global thinking. Let's see the opportunities as they arise. Let's see the possibilities, and let's do it in relationship together.
This term being non-attached, it's really interesting. It is, I feel a pull towards it, and at the same time, I just have to look at my own behavior. And I very quickly realized that I'm attached to a bunch of stuff in a professional environment, in all areas of my life. So what is it? It's clearly very interesting. There's a strong pull, and I think many would share that, this idea of being able to be deeply open, deeply considerate of possibility, to be flexible. The things you're speaking about are really, they're beautiful things. If I'm, as a leader, unattached, non-attached, what ground am I coming from? How do I cultivate that? Why are some people much more unattached than others? And I feel compelled to bring in a dimension which is in our contemporary cultural context. Being non-attached can be, I think it can be spun as being cold, being calculated, and we're not talking about that.
Not at all.
Right? We're talking about something much more creative and open. But I'll put it back to the question. There's a lot in there. Really, my question is, what ground am I coming from as a leader that's unattached? What does that look like?
Yeah, so let me put non-attachment in context. On one end of a continuum would be being attached, where we need to be in control. We need things to go our way. There's a graspiness to it. And a lot of leaders that I have encountered, and I'd say a good deal of the first 20 years of my own career, a good deal of the first 40 years of my own life, was spent within that narrative. Pursue, get your way. And it's not all bad, but it can get to a point where it can become almost an addiction. And then within relational and organizational dynamics, that can have pretty challenging consequences for others. So that's one end of the spectrum. And I'll come back to, how does that originate and what do we do with that? But what often happens, and I've seen it in organizations, I've seen it with leaders, I've seen it in my own life, I've seen it in the lives of just pretty much most people that I know quite well. We get to a point where we don't get what we want, we don't feel in control, we're disappointed, things go wrong, people upset us, we don't hit the targets for ourselves, we don't achieve the standards that we wanted. And then we can swing the pendulum the whole other way of the continuum and become detached. And detached is where it's like, I don't care, whatever. I'm not really present to this moment. I'm not really connected to myself, to other people. There can be a coldness to that. There can be an antagonism from that perspective. So that's kind of the typical first movement that takes place. We spend a lot of their time in the morning of life, the first half of life, trying to find out, what is it that I want to do? How do I do it? How do I achieve it? How do I get there? And that applies to our own personal lives as much as it applies to how we lead and why we lead. So we subscribe to some narrative of this is the way forward, this is the way to go. Gather more qualifications, gather more experiences, get promotions, get to a place. This is all very natural, healthy, first half of life stuff. But when it gets to the point of addiction, of I need it to go my way, otherwise I raise my voice, I push back, I use my power dynamics to veto the decisions of others, I take credit for the work of other people. When things go wrong, I blame members of my team, but when things go right, when they do well, I take the credit for them. When those kind of dynamics start to unfold, which is very, very common, that's a sign that we are moving into a real place of attachment. It has to go my way, and I have to look good. I have to look good. And then it becomes about managing how others view us. And so non-attachment in this context is usually, unfortunately, it usually happens when we experience challenge and failure. It can be once, or for most people, in my case, it was many, many times. And eventually you kind of realize the stuff I'm grasping for, the stuff I'm reaching for, the way I want to lead, the way I want to influence, the money I want to make, the dynamics that I'm perpetuating in my interpersonal relationships with colleagues, with other people. There's something about this that isn't quite what I had hoped, and it's actually not that healthy. And so we get to a point where we cross a threshold, we enter into some kind of a liminal space where we start to deconstruct the old narratives of what does success look like? What does a happy life look like? What does it mean to be a great leader? How do I define that? And we get to that point and we start to deconstruct it. And for some people, they get to a place through formal practices, informal practices, through relationships, and through a change of story, predominantly through a change of narrative, where we get to a place of non-attachment, where we realize that the more we try to force the moment, the more we try to force ourselves or people into a particular narrow lens, the more we're missing out on opportunities and possibilities, and the more we're missing out on life, and the more that others are missing out on who we really are and our leadership presence. And then we can start to access that and go, non-attachment is in no way being detached. It's not cold. It's not removed. It's not separate. It's being completely here. But it's being completely here without rushing into the moment and seeking to control it. It's been completely present and here because we've gone in to ourselves. We realize a couple of key messages. Firstly, we can only lead others as far as we've gone ourselves. So we need to do the inner work on ourselves if we want to support others, create followership, create dynamics where there's a sense of equitability amongst others, where there's respect, mutual respect, psychological safety, all that good stuff. But secondly, we realize on some level, and it may not be on a cognitively conscious level, but we realize that how we do anything is how we do everything. So the quality of our interactions with each other, the process that we undertake will have an impact on the culture, the team culture, the organizational culture, the fractal DNA of the organization, which in turn will impact our clients, which will impact what we're doing in our community, which will fundamentally impact the long-term contribution that we're making. And when we're all dead and buried in 100 years' time and people think of our organization or people think of our contribution and what we did, it'll be those kind of things that they'll see. So how we do anything is how we do everything, bringing it right back to both this moment as well as the distant long-term future.
You're triggering a memory of my own experience with, I've met a couple of really good leaders in my life, and what you're articulating speaks to my experience of being in the presence of people who there's clearly a vision that is alive, but that vision comes along with an allowing that you feel in their presence, a spaciousness you feel in their presence. And that's why I feel like what you're talking about is, it feels so important, the capacity to, and this word non-attachment, like I personally find it really useful in holding the paradox of, because it is not to say that one doesn't have a sense of direction, or there isn't to some extent a communion or an understanding of one's, even desires. But it seems to be, am I understanding you right, in that it seems to be, if we look at non-attachment in leadership, it seems to be the capacity to notice one's attractions and aversions, to hold those lightly, so as to facilitate a movement of a group in a certain direction.
Absolutely. That's it. It's being, in some ways, radically present to the vision, the strategy, the long term, the contribution. and creating the conditions for that to be realized in the best possible ways.
So we're talking really here about, if I'm understanding you correctly, a metaphor for business that's much more like gardening than a machine.
Absolutely. That's something that I often talk about on my team programs. Just even last week with an executive team, we spent a long time thinking about how in their particular industry, so much of the metaphor has been the machine. Inputs, throughputs, outputs. Tweak the machine, it'll get better, that'll be good. More efficiencies, pragmatism, utilitarianism, all that stuff. This is about the gardening. It's about the ecosystem. It's about paying attention, understanding the seasonality, knowing when to prune and when not to prune, when to harvest and when not to harvest. All that good stuff so that we allow the conditions to emerge and don't try to force it or control it, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But we can be a very benign force, and it can be very beautiful to be part of along each step, not just when the harvest comes.
I really want to ask you to say more about what happens when I treat the world as machine. Can you say more about what you've observed in organizations? Because it is so common, and we talk about the economic machine and the business machine, and we come out of a couple years of cultural history where the machine metaphor it's what has underpinned the Industrial Revolution. It's so deeply ingrained, and it almost feels like it's the water we swim in. You don't even notice it. Mm-hmm. So what happens when I look at my organization like a machine? What can you say more about the kind of behaviors that I'm more likely to engage in when I adopt that model of reality?
Mm-hmm. Well, fundamentally, we think that we're in control in a way that we're almost like a puppet master. Move this here, change that there, little inputs here. We're tweaking a machine. Success is something that we plan in advance. We take a big picture, macro view of things. We set targets and often don't mind how do we get there, what the process is, what the relational dynamics are. We tend to come at it from the perspective of inputs, throughputs, and outputs. We've got a problem to solve. It becomes a series of problems to solve. What's the problem? Where do we go? How do we do this? There's a metaphor around this that's coming to me from the story where there was the Longitude Act was passed back in the 1700s because the British Navy needed to know how do we measure longitude as well as latitude. And we need a reliable machine, a reliable clock that if it's, aligned correctly with the same time as the clock at Greenwich, we can do the maths and we can work out exactly where we are. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. It was amazing what happened. It was amazing they were able to produce it and to have two of these clocks aboard every ship. And it led to lots of things, lots of safety and navigation, but also lots of certainty in commerce as well, commerce and trade. And yet, thousands of years beforehand, in the Pacific Islands, there was a whole different way of navigation, which was based on understanding where you are. And they'd have these songs where they would sing for the islands to come towards them. And then they'd pay attention to the vibrations in the boat, and they'd notice when a different current would strike them from a different part of the world. And they'd know, oh, this is where I am. And they'd look up at the stars at night and they go, oh, this is where we are at this time of year. That's where we're being drawn forth into. So there was that narrative of we're not in the middle of things here. We're not in control of things. We're aware of all of the elements around us and we're being drawn forth. And that was a very, very reliable form of navigation. So both of them work. Both of these approaches work, but they have different long-lasting impact and different legacy. And so in organizations that have the machine as metaphor, so much of it is about certainty, clarity, control. It's so appealing. And we need that. We need elements of that. Absolutely. We need boundaries.
It's seductive. I'm not going to lie. It's very seductive.
Yeah. It's very seductive because it gives us a sense of, this is where we're going and this is what we're going to do next. And this is how we know for sure. But even just looking at the toll that it takes on workers, on well-being, think of some of the decisions that are made based on efficiency rather than what's good for our clients, what's good for the environment, what's good for long-term sustainability of the resources that we use in producing what we're doing, what's equitable, what's focusing on extraction versus what is regenerative. I think a lot of the machine pieces that we've had for the last few hundred years, at one level, there's a fundamental focus on extraction, which cannot continue forever. Like, we know that. It cannot continue forever, given the resources that we have. So there's a cost to it. It's just that the cost is over the long term, and it's not necessarily something that we're going to experience ourselves. It'll be the next generation of workers or the next few generations of our children and grandchildren. Whereas the gardening approach, the more ecosystem approach, the alive system, that's much more to do with local experiments. Let's see what works. In the context of a grand plan, let's try out other little local experiments and create little spaciousness for this. And we'll see. And if things start to work better than what we planned in advance, we'll follow them. And if they don't, we'll follow the original plan. So that's the both and approach here. It's about diversity. So it's not just doing the one or two things the way we've always done them, but it's about going, how do we allow different variables in, and how do we allow different things to take place? My family get a vegetable box every 2 weeks from our local organic farm. My friend is the farmer, and we just spoke yesterday about, at the moment where some of us are struggling to cook and eat some of the vegetables that are being delivered, things that we don't normally have, kohlrabi and different types of Swedes. But it's about the diversity, and he was reminding me of what it does to the soil and the importance of it. So the stuff that we do like is going to come on stronger, and it's going to be really bountiful in the future as a result of this diverse approach. So there can be some of that, like we engage in diversity, different approaches, and sometimes quite quickly we realize this isn't working. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. But we've tried something, and people have had a voice, and people who wanted to try it feel included, and their voices have been heard, and there's more motivation, and there's more engagement. So it can be a positive from a people perspective. It's less about managing the outcomes, which the machine is all about, and it's more about managing the mindsets. How are we thinking about the scenarios that we're facing? How are we talking to each other? How are we engaging with our clients? How are we frontline responsive? So we empower people who are talking to the clients directly to go and talk to the clients that we have. I remember working with a bank in the Netherlands, and they were talking about using agile methodologies. And some of the mortgage brokers, on the day that their clients were moving house, they were empowered and they went and they helped them move house. They helped in that frontline responsiveness, totally connect at a personal level with the people they'd been supporting. And for both them and the people who were taking out the mortgage, it was just this incredibly positive, encouraging experience. So this frontline responsiveness gave them incredible levels of engagement, and they were proudly talking to me and my colleagues about like how exciting it was to get to do that. We have as well, then the last couple of things, we have post-specified success. So we go, although we know we've got a few targets that we need to hit, there needs to be some space to try out different things, and only afterwards will we know if it was successful or not, because only afterwards will we get the live feedback from clients as we've gone on a journey with them, because it's about having the ongoing conversation. How do we speak to each other? How do we listen to each other? How do we speak to our clients? How do we find out what else they need? How do we find out what are the emerging trends? Rather than saying, this is what we're selling, this is how we're doing it, this is the way, you're in or you're out. It's about that relational dynamic, speaking to them, hearing from them, evolving, changing as you go. So that's that more alive system. It's a different tonality.
It's a fundamentally different tonality. And I think in the companies that we've studied over the years and invested in, many of the most interesting ones, there's a pronounced attentiveness to the quality of the inputs and a feeling within the organization that if you really attend to the quality of the inputs, the outputs will take care of themselves over time. And it's not that these businesses, it's very much the both and that you're speaking about. It's not that these businesses have any aversion to measuring things. In some cases, they're very good at measuring things. But they're also very attentive to the fact that anything you measure is an output of a system that has inputs. And those inputs are embedded in a web of relationships. And this gets me to this feeling around quality. And I'd love to bring in the leadership dimension of this, but just to say, quality, it seems, in business, one could define it as an organization that is embedded in win-win relational dynamics or win-win relationships with, well, yes, the highest quality would be all conceivable stakeholders, right? And if we think about the stakeholder webs, you have, 5, 6, 7, 8 party models, right? All the way to, customers, suppliers, distributors, employees, shareholders, local community, regulators, all the way to the more integrated models, which include future generations. And that I guess that behavior is pretty rare today. So we have this definition of quality that I think is, very much alive to us in the work that we do and in this project. And the fact that we're sitting here today is very much a result of this interest in understanding quality, in understanding the attentional component of this. And so to bring this all back to leadership and this question of leadership and this gardening metaphor that you've used, can you tell us some stories of what leadership looks like as it moves from this machine metaphor of subject-object distinction, acting on the world, separating things, manipulating things, being in control, very seductive from the perspective of the ego. So as we move towards more of a gardening metaphor with more of an emphasis on the quality of the inputs, more openness to new information arising in the field, a degree of flexibility, adaptiveness, what do leaders look like that are firmly grounded in that way of behaving? What does their behavior look like?
To build on what you said a few minutes ago, Will, it's not that they get all loose and floppy and drop their standards. It's quite opposite to that. They know what healthy containers are, and they know how to build boundaries around that and to create the structures and the systems and the vision of what it is we want to do. But the vision isn't necessarily always 100% clarified as to this is what the outcomes are going to look like. So within that framing, they can bring a humility. And I see that with the leaders that I work with over the long term, there is a humility to realize, like some of the science behind it, that each second, just 1.2 gigabytes of data available to our senses. And in a good moment, we can process up to 124 megabytes. So a humility to realize I'm going to miss a lot of stuff. I'm going to miss a lot of stuff all the time. And I have my biases, and my biases are based on my personality and where I've come from. And so the leaders who are doing this really well, they've come to know within themselves some of what their biases are and some of what their narratives and their stories are. And they're able to transcend that and give space to others. Like I was working with a team recently, and the head of the company, he said, here's how we've done it for the last number of years. Here's what we've worked on. We've used this particular approach. We've brought in people from a sports psychology background, and we've done these kind of things. This is what I like. This is what I like to do. I said, great. I went and I interviewed all the members of the executive team, and I came back and I said, look, I'm hearing some feedback that they want things to go in a different direction, a different style, a different tone. And he just straight away said, absolutely, let's do that. Fine. Let's try it out. I'm in your hands. We'll go with it. We'll give it a go, and we can adapt as we go. So there was that trust. There was that humility. There was that openness. And even when we got away to our offsite to do a big few days of addressing things that he hadn't anticipated we'd need to address, but the team wanted to address, and we got into some great conversations and processes around it. There was just that humility for him to go, well, we need to go where the team wants to go, because I've got my approach and I got my preferences, but let's go with what's required. And that led to a whole set of conversations around the nature of communication, the nature of passive aggression amongst that team, the nature of efficiency and using the machine metaphor as being dominant, and people realizing they're just not talking enough, they're not listening enough, they are prejudging things and giving the space. But that was all facilitated because the leader said, okay, I know what my preferences are, and I know the tight ship that I've run heretofore, and I'm open to trying something new, and we'll trust the process. Even last week, I think we had group process in a team coaching environment for the first time. And so I've been working with this leader for the last 5 years. We did individual coaching, then I worked with the number 2, then I worked with his top team, and then I worked with the next leadership team. And this was all new to him. He hadn't done systemic work in this way before. And he'd ask the questions, and he'd read the stuff, and he'd try out different modalities. And, there's a real courage, like a real acknowledgement of when he's afraid, acknowledgement of like dealing with stress, dealing with risk, dealing with like, what's the importance of this? How important is this? Do we really need this? And just ongoing conversations. So we've been through a lot of highs, a lot of lows together. And then I came out of a series of one-on-one coaching sessions with some of the leadership team last week. And he was like, great, we're going to have team coaching. It's going to be fun after what we did last month. And I was like, I don't think this is going to be fun. We've got some serious issues to address. The question is, do you want to address them? And so I laid out what they were. And just sitting there going, look, we're going for this. We need to hear it. Even if it's not what we want to hear, we need to hear it. And so for the very first time, after 5 years, we ended up in a group process dynamic. And there was all the things that you'd expect in group process, where people had space and freedom to talk about the unspoken, the challenges that they're holding, the tensions that they're feeling, all that kind of stuff. So for me, again, I was so impressed with this leader for giving permission, for listening in the meeting, not getting triggered by some of the more critical feedback that he was receiving, being very non-attached, present to it, open. And the next day saying, look, I've had 3 walk-in talks with 3 of the team, and I'm beginning to really understand it and understand where I need to change and what I was doing in ways that I didn't understand. But now I see that some of my single point decisions were having a big impact and were disempowering some of them. So the relationship continues. So they're just 2 examples from the last couple of weeks of leaders I really respect, who really are contemplative, non-attached leaders, getting stuck into the busy, difficult, challenging work of leadership, but doing it in a way that is creating an atmosphere, a culture of permission, growth, and this gardening metaphor for the whole organization.
Yeah, as much as the machine metaphor is seductive, I think what's shining through is that it really is severely limiting. I mean, in case we hadn't gotten the memo sort of culturally or civilizationally, right, that you try to control things in a complex adaptive system, and at any scale you get into trouble through externalities and all manner of issues that arise from that top-down way of doing things. And so as much as it is seductive, there's something that we're talking about here that seems very, very potent. And it seems to allow for ways of relating that are so much more creative.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree.
In your work, you've articulated, and I guess I'll come back to your book, there's a lot you've offered around a toolkit to cultivate some of the, well, here's another way to put it. You mentioned the importance of inner work. For those that might, clearly see the power and the potency of the gardening metaphor as opposed to the machine metaphor, let's talk about some of the practical modalities, practices that would help a leader align with these kind of possibilities, foster these kinds of environments. The interest from my side, and I think for our audience, to the extent that I can speak to their curiosity, there is something about being competitive and about being effective in the world and about building things that endure and last and serve. And so it's a really deeply practical quest that we're on. What are the skills? What are these skills and practices that a leader needs to look at carefully if they want to behave in these kinds of ways?
Pick up on your point of being competitive in competition. Obviously, it's a common trait amongst senior leaders that I know and that I work with. And it can be really healthy. It can be really beautiful. It can be really about achieving excellent standards. And then it can take a turn where it's really about beating others. It's more about creating the win-lose rather than the win-win. So it's no longer the pursuit of excellence. It's the pursuit of winning so that others can't, so that others don't. For me, there's a tipping point there. The moving from excellent standards into that. That's more about the ego, the self. That's more about the stories we've inherited around what I need to do, who I need to be. It's more about the nervous system states that we've cultivated. So when that's taking place a lot, I often encounter people who are living predominantly from their sympathetic nervous system state, so the fight or flight, so the drive, cortisol, adrenaline, the push, the go. And so to create these win-win scenarios and to cultivate this kind of presence, it starts off by understanding our own leadership journey, where we've come from, what has influenced us, people, relationships, traits that we have from birth, the 170 plus traits that we've inherited through the last 5 or 6 generations of our family, understanding ourselves a bit more, why we've made certain choices, why we are driven and pushed in certain directions. What's the nature of competition for us? Is it about beating others, or is it about excellent high standards and winning with a sense of achievement? And then moving into looking at the nature of, say, the body. In the book, I have a chapter looking at polyvagal just as one way of looking at somatic work. So, am I pushing, going, and then collapsing a lot, pushing, collapsing, and every weekend and every vacation, every holiday, it's just like recovery time, because it's the recipe for burnout over time. Or do I have ways of changing state? Do I have ways of having formal and informal practices to allow me to enter into a more spacious place, the ventral vagal state of safety, of possibility, of opportunity, where I'm not just present to the drives within me, but I'm present to the opportunities, integrating left brain, right brain, integrating my whole presence and going, what's happening in my environment? How can I see things more clearly? How can I get more precise at certain things? How can I not just show up from a knee-jerk reaction of what I've always done, but is there space for things to be even better? Is there space to raise the standards even more? Taking some time to think about challenge and failure. Some of us are excellent because we fear failure. Some of us pursue great goals because the alternative is too difficult to comprehend, and we're running hard from something. And on the surface, it looks excellent to others. And even to us, it can feel excellent from time to time. But for many people, the success is never enough because it's about running from some kind of a fear. And going inside and beginning to shine a light on this, getting into some more psychodynamic work, looking at maybe things like the shadow, the parts of myself that I deny and that I doubt, that I'm afraid of, or the parts of myself that others see, that I can't see or I won't see, and therefore the impact we have on others. So progressively over time, moving from the cognitive and the conscious into the pre-conscious, into the psychodynamic, into understanding some of the deeper drives as to patterns of behavior we have, reasons we've made choices in the past, how we show up to meetings, how we show up to people and interpersonal dynamics. And then starting to understand a little bit more around the personas that we have, who we thought we needed to be in order to be a quote-unquote leader. What does it mean to be a leader? Is it about the pay packet? Is it about the legacy? Is it about what others think? Is it about what a parent who maybe isn't even around anymore, is it about what they thought? What are the drivers? What are the motivations that we're pushing and going? So as we explore and examine these things and get deeper and deeper and then get into more embodied work, I think of last week, I was with a client, we got into some bioenergetics work. We got into some somatic work, looking at his reason for not engaging in conflict, why he's become such a peacekeeper and such a friendly, approachable person, but can sometimes be frustrated with people trying to take advantage of him and his perception of it, but just can't seem to step up, can't seem to step into his healthy aggression. And we were looking at, some of the stuff in his early years and doing some pretty interesting somatic work around that. That doesn't happen in most coaching sessions, and we've been working there for a good while together. But moving from the cognitive into what's the stuff that we're holding on to, that we're warring against, that we're pushing away from. Understanding the nature of meaning, the nature of what's deeply most important. And then, as we do this inner work, bring it to others. Understanding, again, what I did with a team recently, we kind of went back to basics. Senior executives who I said, will we just take a little bit of time to look at our communication? And a few little nods. And as we got into it, realized I hadn't done too much on presence and understanding their own presence. Some of the simple but difficult to practice skills around communication, around what does healthy assertiveness look like? How do I state what I like and don't like, what I want and don't want? Then importantly, what I need and don't need. How do I do it in a way that's not aggressive, that's inviting of relationship, of conversation? How do we deal interpersonally and one-on-one and as a group with trust? Where is trust broken down? Closure? How do we do it from a place of not trying to win and prove and fight, but be present to what's there, not project onto the situation what we hope or what we think is there, or brush it under the carpet and move forward, but how to actually get these embedded foundations in place for the team, for the culture, so that the long term can be as excellent as possible. These are just some of the practices. But I really think, you heard me there talking a lot about the individual work. I think it starts with our relationship with ourselves as a leader, because it's the overflow of that is what we bring into every interaction, every relationship, which has an impact on frontline workers in our organization, on our clients, on our community, and how we contribute over the long term.
The difference in quality of experience when one is in the presence of a leader that is motivated by fear predominantly, and that feels like one of the most common experiences one can have is experience the presence of a leader that is pursuing a goal to avoid something else.
Yes.
And the difference in quality between that and a leader who is playing for the love of the game, for the love of what is possible, for the love of gathering people to play together.
And paradoxically, in that first instance, when we're running and moving and leading to avoid something, on some level we create the thing that we're trying to avoid. Eventually. Because we're running so hard against it, we're trying to avoid it so much. But it's in our subconscious. It's something that we unconsciously, we find ourselves in positions and in relationships where we're like, I did not want to experience this. That's why I went in that direction. How has this happened again?
There's something of a little voice in my head that says, okay, all this gardening stuff sounds really good. And, who wouldn't want more creative experiences in business, and who wouldn't want to be more, who wouldn't want to operate an organization that's more coherent with this web of stakeholder relations and more adaptive. And at the same time, there's this voice which in my experience is, it sounds like fear, it feels like fear of losing control, of letting go. And I think a lot of leaders that I speak to feel this, right? That they'll, from first principles, what we're describing is like, it is coherent. It is actually, if you look at the patterns of organization of nature, the system of life, all the science, the physics, the biology, how nature works, what lasts a long time, right? It's all there. The writing's on the wall as to what ways of organizing behavior are more conducive to flourishing. And at the same time, when it gets to actually living that, putting it into practice, when it comes to, stuff around KPIs and measuring activity and incentivizing people, I see a lot of people really blocked from really following through. And from what I'm hearing from you, really the issues lie at the individual level within the leader's psyche, for the most part, it seems. And then, of course, a culture that would reinforce tendencies within leaders towards control, towards, a knowing, a planning, a fixing, but really this control dimension, ego dimension. So I say all this to say, for leaders that get it in principle, what are ways you have seen work to start acting on this journey towards the kind of behavior that really seem to be more coherent, more effective, more aligned with, our classical virtues of the true, the good, the beautiful?
Well, let me premise it by addressing one of the things you said there about, the KPIs and the measurements and, just falling back into that loop and that being a reason to avoid it. It's commonly known that what you reward is what you get. So if you set up your system for that, you're going to get that. If you set up your system to focus on outputs and you reward outputs only, you'll get outputs, and the process can be all over the place. And so contemplative leadership, being non-attached, it's this non-dualistic both-and approach. It absolutely asserts we need KPIs, we need measurement, we need to understand what is happening, what has been happening, what might be happening. But it's acknowledging that that has a place within the overall system. And how much power does it need to have within the overall system? And is that the dominant thing that we want to focus on, to use to reward behaviors? Or is there something else? Organizations, think of organizations I've worked with, big tech companies I've worked with in the past, who 50% of your annual review is based on what does your team say? What's your net promoter score from your team? And so that forced managers over time to focus on interpersonal dynamics with their team, because if the scores weren't good, they weren't going to get a promotion. So just simple structural things. But back to the big question here. I have friends who say, it's all about addressing things at a dominant cultural level and, what's going on and how do you change the dominant forces in society. And I really don't think that's the starting point. I really do think the starting point is in the individual leader who's got positional power, but most importantly has influence within a system. I think I've outlined some of the different exercises before, so going from the cognitive, so doing exercises on understanding your story, where you've come from, what shapes you, understanding your approach to challenge and failure, understanding what's happening in your system and in your body and in your nervous system. And are you predominantly focused on surviving and vigilant, or is this something else that's dominant? And how do you change state and how can you be present? There's stuff around formal and informal practices. So the formal practice that we know is so efficacious around allowing us into this presence is meditation. All different types of meditation can work, but even just 42 days of daily meditation can densify the neurons in the prefrontal lobe. So as that happens, every time we get triggered, we get an amygdala hijack, there's something, difficult email, see somebody walking in the corridor and you remember the last time that you had an encounter with them and we're about to get triggered into our sympathetic state. There's just that extra moment of calm. There's that extra moment of poise. There's that extra piece of self-regulation where we don't kind of lose it and just throw all the toys out of the pram or react based on negative instincts. But we can have a presence, a poise, and in fact, greater degrees of rationality, greater degrees of being logical. I mean, that's the key to this. It's not that we're throwing logic or rationality out the window. It's that we're seeking greater clarity, and we're seeking to understand the stories and the narratives and the contexts in which we're applying our logic and rationale. So that's the formal practice, would be the meditation. And then the informal practices, there's so many. Often I run through an exercise with people where we go through the people, the places, the times and the activities in their environment that provide for them cues of safety. So who do you want to spend time with? I spend time with my boys and I just relax right down. What are the places that you go to? Some people go to nature, the garden. I go to the sea, to the beach. When I'm there, it just allows a reset and a preparation for what's to come in terms of like a challenging workday, a challenging week. The activities, what are the things that we do that provide cues of safety and allow us to really settle down and get grounded in our presence, which in turn allows all of the brain to be functioning, and we're not just going on hypervigilance and what's a threat in my environment. So knowing the people, the places, the times and the activities, and where we can get self-regulated, having that 10 minutes in the morning to read quietly with our coffee before everyone else gets up. It's those simple little things or the informal practices that can create the presence required to meet the busy demands. Then there's things like work hygiene, like all we know about multitasking these days. You spend up to 47% of our day multitasking, where it's deeply inefficient. We don't engage in deep work. So how do we carve out time for deep work? How do we get the balance right? That requires boundaries, that requires communicating with others. How do we understand that at a systemic level and bring that into other people? Bring it into our team? How do we create the best conditions possible for success? What does success look like then? A lot of people who do my kind of work, we talk about the Kirkpatrick method of evaluating, learning and coaching. So the top level is, how does it make me feel? Do I feel excited and good as a result of something? But then what new knowledge have I learned? What new stuff do I now know that I can apply? And then the next layer down is, well, what new behaviors over time am I beginning to do? And what am I beginning to stop? That's going to be helpful. And then at a fundamental level, what's the impact on the business, or what's the impact on the system, on the whole organization? Stuff that we can't always plan in advance because we don't know what it's going to look like. But what happens is as we're engaging in these practices, we don't exactly know what impact it's going to have on the system. And we need to be open, and we need to have a curiosity and a humility about it. In Amy Edmondson's work about psychological safety, she talks about the importance of leaders displaying fallibility, showing that they make mistakes, because that encourages others to do the same. To say it's okay to get it wrong and not to have to hide your mistake, and to talk about it and to learn. Then to bring curiosity, to ask questions, open-ended questions, the what, the how, like what are we doing? How is it working? What else could we try? How else might this make a difference? That requires a humility from leaders. And thirdly, she talks about focusing on challenges as a learning problem more than as an execution problem. So how do we work through the process? How do we work through it? So creating those kind of dynamics creates cues of safety to others, creates a dynamism within the system. And bringing that curiosity is really important. I'm reminded finally of the Copenhagen principle back in the day when they were exploring quantum at the start and they were shooting electrons from an electron gun, and they had a single slit piece of cardboard, and the particle would remain a particle the whole time. And then they had a double slit, and then it would move into a waveform, and then it would rejoin at the back end and hit a backboard as a particle again. And Heisenberg and Bohr were kind of going, what is happening? What is happening here? And their fundamental takeaway was there's no such thing as objectivity. How we participate in anything fundamentally affects the thing itself. How we participate in this experiment and the conditions that we create allow a particle to stay a particle or allow it to move into a wave and to change. And the same principle back to leaders, to know that like the machine and being objective and being in control, that's not actually scientifically accurate. That it's about how you as a leader participate in the system. How you observe things is really how you participate in things. What work you're doing on yourself is impacting those around you interpersonally and then eventually over time. And you get a key bunch of people doing the work, bringing it together. If it's a hierarchical structure, there's a trickle-down effect. It's a flatter structure, you're creating little islands of sanity, lighting little fires around the system, shaping the culture as it goes. But it all starts, I believe, with doing the work ourselves and knowing our part in the wider system.
It's another thing that's striking is the quality of the attention that we bring. It's very much as you say. I mean, it's you put it beautifully. The quality of our attention shapes the experience. And if I'm coming into a situation wired out of fear, expecting people to be at their worst, expecting people to be self-interested, expecting other people to try to control me, if I'm coming into a situation out of that kind of disposition, I'm going to invite that behavior. And I try to remind myself of that. There's better days and worse days. That as we, well, I want to ask you, what do you love the most about your work right now?
Quite a few things. I'm trying to think. What do I love the most?
It's also such a machine question as well. I'm just laughing. I'm such the one thing. It is amazing. Maybe I just to unpack that, the way in which culturally there is something about the most and this idea of maximizing, and so maybe in the spirit of, and really as an attempt to honor the space that we're in right now, what is something that you love about?
Do you know, you reminded me of a conversation I had with my editor for the Contemplative Leader, because it's published in the US and obviously I'm here in Ireland. And there was a lot of top 3 and tips and approaches. Right? And I was like, I come from a culture and a literary culture where we don't do that. We tell stories, and there are multiple layers to the story, and over time different layers will emerge for the reader when they're ready. So it's a similar kind of dynamic to this. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's it. That it's the lists. They're absurd, actually, if you think about it. And I want to say, I mean, it's something that's very dear to my heart and makes my question all the more absurd in that context, in that what matters varies context by context. And there is no one thing, or there is no 3 things. There never was. It's a fetish and fantasy of the mind. So, so with all that said,
yes,
a story about what you love in your work.
I love when somebody goes from the theory to the practice. When they come in with, I'm busy, I need a solution, I need an outcome. I think of someone I've been working with for the last 2 years. We started off in your traditional, more, functional, structural, executive coaching approach, and we did psychometrics and 360s, and we got all the data points, and because that's important. We need to start where somebody is. We need to start where someone feels comfortable to start and where they have faith in what's going on. Then that led to some sharing, some opening, some talk about the system that he was operating within, and then over time talking about his own personal journey, and then talking about his own spirituality, and talking about how that had affected his view of his role in work. And then, I suppose about 6-7 months ago, we ended up talking about one of my mentors, who you know as well, Richard Rohr, and talking about the importance of that kind of work. And I remember saying to him, I said, when I first met Richard, my first conversation was, I said, I want to take your work and I kind of want to translate it out to a wider audience, like some of the principles of it, so that people in all walks of life can understand what it's like to be non-dualistic, to be non-attached. And then this client, he just took this on so much, and he started watching a lot of Richard's talks and videos and reading his work. And so even in the last 2 months, we've gotten into some really interesting spaces of understanding win-win scenarios within his team, understanding himself more, understanding some of the stuff that he's carried with him over the years, and he's kind of stuff where he's been disappointed, and through that disappointment has kind of taken it out on those that he worked with, and learning about that, and then going to have conversations and even apologizing to some people, and then like just clearing up the air. So seeing his own journey and how it's affected others. And I'm also reminded of somebody else who I worked with her for a number of years. Yeah, like we got into some really, really deep work about identity and about why she was doing what she was doing and leading this cutting edge team in this global bank, and why she did it, and would she stay, would she go, what was the point? And then stepping into her power more and speaking up more within the system and becoming a lot more appropriately assertive in ways that weren't leading to conflict, which had been a fear for her. And then seeing when we worked with the whole team and people who some of them hadn't spoken in a number of years, and seeing the trickle-down effect of her stepping into her leadership, of having on different dynamics. Now she's moved bank now and coaching some of her team again in her new bank. So seeing I love the long term. I love seeing people, working with people over the long term and seeing them grow within themselves to the point that they're just really comfortable and really confident in who they are as a leader. And kind of the sky's the limit, and they're just seeing opportunities and possibilities. And every now and then we'll check in and see what's going on, and then start to do more systemic work across the system. So like, big picture, I love seeing systemic work take place, because I know that's having such a huge, profound impact on everyone in the organization, on their families at home, because, you know, your manager has greater impact on your health and well-being than anybody else in life. So seeing that go in a really healthy direction, and seeing that impact clients and communities, and seeing amazing ideas unfold that can be really beneficial for the future, that reminds me of why I do what I do. And that's because I couldn't do that particular work, but I can help to facilitate it from the background. So that's exciting.
Beautiful. I'd like to read a couple of lines from David Whyte that I feel may be a nice way to conclude this conversation. Start close in. Start with your own question. Start with the ground beneath your feet. Start with the first step, not the second or the third. Take a small step you can call your own. Start with your own way to begin the conversation. Give up on other people's questions. Be humble and focus.
Beautiful.
This was fun. Thanks for taking the time, Patrick.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our conversation today. For more resources on the subject of quality across the domains of business, investing, psychology and art, please visit our website, theartofquality.co.